Are you serious?
You're paying a price.
Thank you, Wanyama. Colleagues, leaders of the industry, and friends of media, good morning. Are you happy?
Yes, sir.
You're not sure? I stand before you today wearing a different hat, the hat of a researcher. And I've been asked to come and share the findings of a study I was recently requested to undertake by the Kenya Union of Journalists using support from Solidarity. And we did embark on this work in August. We collected data, we've been able to process that data, analyze it, and we have some insights that we can take out of that study. As I hope the slide is visible, and as you can see, the study title was to find out the impact of disinformation and misinformation on media and democracy in Kenya. Certain assumptions are made there, and I'll go into them shortly. The one major assumption, which I want to believe all of us being media professionals, is pretty obvious to many of us, is the reality that malinformation, so to speak, and that is the twins of disinformation and misinformation, that reality is rising globally. And that rise is mainly coming out of the growing use of digital platforms, but more specifically, the growth and proliferation of social media. And many who have looked at this reality see an obvious connection to democracy, in that where we allow malinformation, in many instances, democracy suffers. So we were being invited to find out how does that play out in our own context in Kenya. And we went on to design a study and define a scope for it. The scope is described in many, many ways, but of importance to us is that we chose to use the 2022 general election as a situation that perhaps presents us with an opportunity to find out what the implications of disinformation and misinformation are in a democracy. In doing that, we did develop 5 key study objectives of disinformation. The second objective was to hard on that election, and the third was to find out what mechanisms and what channels do the purveyors of disinformation and misinformation use to disseminate their messages in Kenya. And number 4 was to determine any strategies or recommendations that the fraternity might use to counter disinformation and misinformation. And number 5 was to explore or assess any policy or legislative frameworks that could be applied in combating the same. We went on to design the study, and that takes us to methodology. We chose, then we determined several techniques for that, so that what that allows us to do is to identify people who by net have in many ways a front seat to see how information plays out in such a situation. Because we thought they have useful information. And we did determine various categories of individuals who we thought had that kind of front seat. Development workers, electoral observers, politicians, and even some CSOs. We also, for practical reasons, chose to do this in Nairobi, given that the time we had couldn't go all over Kenya, but also that a lot of electoral decisions, electoral happenings in our country happen in Nairobi. So we thought that having a deep dive into Nairobi should give us a fairly accurate sense of that reality. When we looked at our sampling from using that structure, we were able to come up with a sample size of 181 respondents. So we did send out 181 questionnaires, which gave us a response rate of 60%. And those who do this kind of work say that 6% is an okay level. And we went out to the field on August 3rd to 16 and collected both quantitative and qualitative data. And we were able to then come back and analyze those using descriptive statistics and thematic analysis. So what did that then give us? And the first set of findings, I'm sure the main report will be shared so that we get these findings in detail, but just to take out some big, broad brushes from what we found out. In terms of prevalence of disinformation and misinformation in the last election, this cohort did tell us that at least 75% of them felt that the spread was very high, and about 20% felt it was just moderate, and only 5.6% thought it was low. That gives us a sense. But in terms of the nature of disinformation, we find that that cohort felt that elections provide the biggest opportunity for disinformation to happen. Was told differently, but it seems that it's during elections that malinformation takes a center stage, so to speak. 44.4% of them felt that way. Another 28.7% felt they saw more of this during health pandemics, like recently we had the coronavirus. Then 17.6% linked it more with the security situations, for instance, during terrorism attacks. 9.3% said they didn't know. So given that nearly half saw elections as the opportunity that the purveyors of malinformation use more, we did try to break that down some more. And we saw that even within the electoral cycle, the malinformation plays differently during different situations. A lot of it happens in the campaign period prior to the election day. Then it goes down during voting, but then it rises a little bit when the results starts getting transmitted. And then note the media, the mechanisms that the purveyors use, and we also explore some countermeasures. When you look at the impact, looking at that table, we see that of all the factors that we had disaggregated and presented to the result and the land extent, when you put that together, you find that the two last factors sort of take a center stage. These respondents felt that the media's role as a watchdog is increasingly getting diluted by the presence of disinformation and misinformation going to the same audiences that the media serves. And that the more this reality exists, the more the public tend to think that sometimes the media is being used for propaganda ends. And that, of course, has implications for public trust of media. When it comes to mechanisms, we look at which sort of channels tend, in which sort of channels we tend to find more of this disinformation. And this cohort felt that a lot of the disinformation is happening on social media. 54.8% of them felt that way. This was then followed by radio at 19.3%, then TV at 8.3%, and print media at 3.7%. Word of mouth coming at 13.9%. So in terms, that perhaps might guide any interventions, but I also need to caution those of you who know about the two-step theory of media would know that it might present, for example, that print media or television for that matter has very low incidence, but you also know that a lot of the chatter, a lot of the conversations that happen on social media often spring from mainstream media. So there's still relevance in terms of importance there. When we asked this cohort what possible countermeasures would the media and friends of democracy generally apply, many of them, 60.4% of them, felt that having fact-checkers, having fact-checking desks, and quickly debunking misinformation is perhaps the best opportunity that we have as media and as a fraternity to fight back. 20.8% of them felt that there should be some investigative responses to disinformation so that the agencies whose job is to fight crime actually need to follow up on some of these issues and bring to book the perpetrators. 18.9% felt that media literacy is an important intervention for us to have. The last set of findings looked at impact on democracy, the role of social media, and assess the effectiveness of the existing law. So when we unpack social media, we tend to, at least this cohort felt that Facebook is culprit number one at 63%, followed by Twitter now, known as X, at 58.3%, followed by Instagram at 56.5%. Only 40.7% of them felt that WhatsApp was important in this manner. So maybe some guidance for us there. When it comes to the impacts, we've tried to summarize that on the table, and we find that, for instance, IBC and its officials often fall victim of this problem, and of course that one would extend to see that ultimately it has an implication on the result and the outcome of the elections as they were. When it comes to assessing the effectiveness of the existing law, a majority of them felt that the laws as we have them today are only moderately effective in terms of fighting disinformation. There is some opportunity for interventions there. So 5 key points in terms of the conclusions of this study. The first one is that we now have a comprehensive understanding of the impact that malinformation has on Kenya's media and democracy, including insights on its prevalence and consequences to a subversive nature of disinformation and misinformation during elections. These concerns lead to decreased trust in media and have implications for democracy. Number 3, election stakeholders are able to discern, we see from these findings, that organized efforts to manipulate public opinion and real-world consequences, such as attacks on journalists, and eroded trust in mainstream media. So there is a concrete problem for us within this area. Number 4, we conclude that there is an urgent need for a multifaceted approach involving media organizations, civil society, policymakers, and the public to combat this problem. And then finally, the study finds that media has a critical role in safeguarding democracy and against the corrosive effects of false information and emphasizes the importance of understanding and addressing disinformation and to ensure more informed and resilient democratic process. So out of that conclusion, we were able to derive a set of recommendations to different players in our industry. The first step is legislative changes, and it was clear that there's need to enact legislation and there underline the bit with penalties against those who spread false information. There's also need to involve tech companies in combating disinformation through incentives, but also regulation of the law. We think it would be useful to enhance whistleblower protections so that those who have information that could help us fight this problem can come forward. And then also media literacy, to make sure that society, as we grow into the future, gives priority to quality sources of information. There's also a set of recommendations for the policy makers and those in government, and that to do with protecting freedom of information, updating legal frameworks, robust public participation in policy making, a national disinformation task force to perhaps look into this problem a lot more in a lot more depth. We also think that it's important that the executive or policy makers recognize and actually live the reality of promoting media independence to make sure that in our society there are strong and sustainable providers of quality information in an ongoing nature. Of course, digital literacy still comes up. There are recommendations for media houses as it relates to strengthening media independence, the need for a unified policy framework that recognizes the problem that we have in malinformation, so that as we go about doing our news business, we know